Okay, so this is the second afternoon session on September 2nd. So theoretically beginning at 3:30 p.m. Okay, so now at this point we have gone through the various types of wholesome consciousness, and now we come to the unwholesome types of consciousness. Now, it's an interesting distinction that we could see that the wholesome states of consciousness pertain to four planes of existence: the sense sphere plane, fine material plane, immaterial plane, and the supramundane plane. But the unwholesome types of consciousness, according to plane, pertain only to the sense sphere. That there's no unwholesome jhanic consciousness. If one achieves the jhanas, those are wholesome states of consciousness. There's no unwholesome immaterial sphere of consciousness. If one achieves the immaterial meditative attainments, those are wholesome states of consciousness. And certainly there's no unwholesome supramundane consciousness, because that is the liberating consciousness. So the unwholesome consciousness always pertains just to the sense sphere. And this type of consciousness is distinguished into three kinds according to the root. There are three unwholesome roots mentioned again and again in the Buddhist discourses and the suttas. So the three unwholesome roots are greed, hatred, and delusion. And these three unwholesome roots are called roots because they root the state of consciousness and they impart to it their quality of being unwholesome, or in the case of the wholesome roots, of being wholesome. Now, of these three unwholesome roots, greed and hatred, in terms of individual states of consciousness, are mutually exclusive. That is, one never has a state of consciousness in which greed and hatred are simultaneously present. If there's a consciousness with greed, at that time, in that state of consciousness, no hatred. If there's a state of consciousness with hatred, at that time, on that occasion, no greed. Of course, greed and hatred can sort of feed into each other. So somebody is greedy, then when somebody creates an obstacle to the fulfillment of their greed, then they get angry, and then hatred arises. And then to overcome their hatred, or maybe as an expression of their hatred, they try to acquire more and more goods, more and more pleasure. So hatred is conditioning greed. So the two are sort of mutually conditioning, but because they point in different directions, or they have different tones to them, they can't be present simultaneously. But with delusion, it's a different story. Delusion, whenever greed is occurring, delusion is present simultaneously along with that greed. And whenever hatred is present, delusion is also present along with that hatred. And so in this way, in the unwholesome states of consciousness, though we distinguish them as rooted in greed, rooted in hatred, and those in which just delusion is present, but in fact, if we're to be more precise, we have to say the greed deluded state of consciousness, the hatred deluded state of consciousness, and those states in which there's just delusion, delusion as a sort of standing on its own. Okay, so first, the Visuddhimagga takes the states rooted in greed, and these are said to be of 8 kinds, which are distinguished according to whether joy or equanimity is present as the governing feeling, according to whether it's accompanied by a wrong view or not accompanied by a wrong view, and according to whether it is prompted, that is, encouraged by others or by one's own persuasion, or whether it arises spontaneously. And so we can see the distinction laid out here in this table. So here we have 8 types rooted in greed. Okay, of these 8, 4 are accompanied by joy. And by joy here is meant a pleasant mental feeling. This is not the beautiful kind of joy like in Beethoven's Ode to Joy, not that kind of ebullient joy. But this is just a pleasant mental feeling, like when one satisfies one's greed, even one gets the delicious ice cream cone and one is sort of lapping it up, then that's greed is accompanying that, and one is, wow, this is so delicious, oh, so wonderful, I'm so happy. So that joy that's arising, that is what is meant here, that kind of feeling. So 4 of them are accompanied by joy, and some are accompanied, 4 are accompanied by equanimity or neutral feeling. You know, one takes what one wants, but one is not elated and exultant because of that. Okay, then of each type here, 2 are associated with wrong view. 2 accompanied by joy are also accompanied by wrong view. 2 are dissociated from wrong view. And similarly, in regard to the neutral feeling. So 2 with wrong view, 2 disconnected from wrong view. And then these are distinguished as to whether they are prompted. That is, if it's not prompted, then it's spontaneous. The greed arises on its own. The greed arises on its own. If it's prompted, then let's go for an ice cream cone. Nah, I don't want the ice cream cone. Come on, it's wonderful ice cream. They have so many different flavors. You can't imagine the flavors. So then you go there and then you get the ice cream and then you're eating it and you're enjoying it, but that joy is not arising. So you're enjoying it with the greedy mind. So it seems a little hard to imagine eating ice cream without having a joyful feeling. Unless you're thinking in the back of the mind, my doctor said I have to avoid things that combine sugar and fat. Okay, then the Visuddhimagga gives some illustrations of these. Okay, so we take the first case. Okay, when a person is happy and then he places wrong view foremost, he adopts a wrong view, and then this is the type of wrong, this is one example of wrong view. There is no danger in sensual desires or sensual pleasures. There are many varieties of wrong view. Even no harm in killing, one could kill and doesn't matter. Or the wrong view that I'm entitled to do whatever I want, so I can act and do whatever I want. So many varieties of wrong view. Okay, and then he either enjoys sense desire. Sometimes one has to translate this into ordinary English. Either he enjoys sense desires with consciousness that in its own individual essence is eager without being urged, or believes auspicious sights and so on have a real substantial core. Then the first kind of unwholesome consciousness arises, that is consciousness that is sluggish and that is the first kind. So one is eager without being urged, and so it's unprompted. It's accompanied by joy, that happiness, and it's accompanied by wrong view. And one then indulges in those sensual desires, and so it's accompanied by greed. Okay, when the mind is sluggish, then it has to be urged on by others to enjoy the sensual pleasures. Then it's the second kind, the kind that's prompted. Okay, and then when a person with a joyful mind, but without adopting any wrong view about what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, but just urged on by one's greed, okay, then it's of the second kind, that's accompanied by pleasant feeling, by joyful feeling, without wrong view, and it is prompted. Okay, then when a person is happy and content without placing wrong view foremost, and then one indulges in sexual intercourse or covets others' good fortune or steals others' goods with consciousness that is eager without being urged, then it is the third kind. So this is the kind that is, it's rooted in greed, accompanied by joy, it's disconnected from wrong view, and it's unprompted, it's spontaneous. And then when it is consciousness that is sluggish and urged on by others, then it's the fourth kind, with greed, accompanied by joy, disconnected from wrong view, and prompted by others. So that is the first four kinds of consciousness rooted in greed. And the second four kinds are substantially the same. The only difference is that the pleasant feeling or joyful feeling is replaced by the neutral feeling, equanimity. Okay, so that is how the state of consciousness rooted in greed is distinguished into 8 kinds. Okay, now we come to the states of consciousness which are rooted in the second unwholesome root. This is hatred. So this kind of consciousness is said to be of only 2 kinds. That is accompanied by, here it's called grief, but this is basically an unpleasant mental feeling. I would not say that in this case that grief is a good translation. The Pali word is domanassa, which can be taken as an unhappy state of mind. So one extreme of that is grief. But as long as the mind is unhappy, dissatisfied in some way, then it's covered by this term domanassa. And it's associated with resentment. Resentment is just a synonym for hatred. So hatred, resentment, aversion are all synonyms. So this kind of consciousness is of two kinds, and the distinction is simply that it's prompted, that is, it's urged on by others, so others stir up. Maybe we just take an example from a few weeks ago, these white supremacists marching through Charlottesville. Maybe there were some guys that joined that march that were not really disposed towards this kind of anger and aversion expressed as white supremacy, but their friends said, come along, and we really have to show that we are the ones in charge. And then they stir up their anger and hatred. So in that case, it's prompted. Whereas if that state of mind arises spontaneously, just through the person's own personal conditioning, then it's spontaneous or unprompted. And so if we look at the table, here I rendered that term domanassa as displeasure. This is actually much better. So it's accompanied, the feeling is that of displeasure. And this is interesting, that according to the Abhidhamma, any state of consciousness that's accompanied by hatred, anger, aversion, resentment, the accompanying feeling is always displeasure. If somebody releases their hatred, their anger, they expresses it, they might feel some satisfaction at that moment. But that is because the hatred or anger has been, in a sense, released. And that is what brings the pleasure. But when the anger or hatred is in the mind, the accompanying feeling is that of displeasure. And this is a place where I have to say I don't completely agree with the Abhidhamma here, that they always have wrong view associated with the state of mind rooted in greed. I'm not sure of the reason for this, and then they have the state of mind rooted in hatred as not connected with wrong view. But it seems to me that indisputably that many states of hatred, particularly the kind that we see on display often in this country over the last couple of years, anti-black, anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, those kinds of, which are often triggered by false reports, rumors and false reports in the news that generate wrong views. It seems to me that wrong view goes along with those types of hatred. Maybe an anger that arises spontaneously, we could say there's no wrong view there. Okay, but as I said, I'm not here to give my personal opinion, but to explain the system, the party line. Okay, then there are two states of consciousness which are rooted in delusion without admixture of other unwholesome roots. Just plain delusion. And one of these is called the doubting consciousness. So this is the consciousness which is accompanied by this skeptical doubt. And this is not the good kind of doubt, the inquisitive doubt, which I would say it's an expression of wisdom. But this is the doubt that is always sort of preventing one from taking that leap into the Dhamma. This is always being viewed, these states of consciousness, in relation to the engagement with the Dhamma. And so it's that doubt, doubting whether the Buddha is enlightened, whether the Dhamma is true or beneficial. And then the other kind of the other citta or kind of consciousness accompanied by delusion without other unwholesome roots, is the restless consciousness. Now, restlessness, as we'll see probably tomorrow, is actually present in all unwholesome states of consciousness. Every unwholesome state of consciousness has some degree of restlessness or agitation within it. But there's a kind of consciousness in which there's no greed, no hatred, no doubt, but it's just a bare, agitated, restless state of mind. And that is the restless consciousness. Consciousness accompanied by plain restlessness. And it's said that these two types of consciousness, rooted exclusively in delusion, are accompanied by the feeling that accompanies those states is one of neutral feeling. So again, this is a point where I would raise some questions. It seems to me that when one is in a state of tormenting doubt, it seems to me that there can be an unpleasant feeling in that state. And certainly when the mind is overrun by restlessness, that also seems to me to be accompanied by an unpleasant feeling. But probably the Abhidhamma is looking at this in terms of micro moments of consciousness. And so it says that these states are accompanied by a neutral feeling. Okay, so that takes us through the wholesome and unwholesome states of consciousness. Now at this point, maybe I should invite people to ask questions. So please feel welcome to ask. And I will stand up so that people in the back can see this movie star style, handsome movie star. Beth, is that correct?
Thank you. I have two questions. I think one's little, but is neutral feeling no feeling?
No.
It's an actual feeling that
it's definitely,
balance?
it's the feeling which is said to be neither painful nor pleasant. So
But it is a
it is a feeling, yeah.
Okay. The other one is probably more complicated, but it's kind of, you refer to it about citta. Sometimes it seems like it's a state of consciousness, but I know it's also like this very momentary thing, like the 17.
Wait, I didn't
sometimes citta is discussed like a state of consciousness.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's discussed like a very momentary, like the 17 steps of a full perceptual process.
Yeah.
So it's of the aggregates, it's the hardest to get an experiential sense of citta. So I was wondering, I think that confuses me. Like, is there anything you can say that helps with the experience of citta, or anything to focus on in meditation that would help?
Yeah, what I found is that this idea of momentary cittas is something which is introduced in the Abhidhamma. One doesn't find it in the suttas. And in fact, out of curiosity, using this electronic program, I did a search for the plural of cittas, cittani, canceling out everything else except the Sutta Pitaka. And the only places where citta occurs in the plural is where it's speaking about a plurality of people or beings. Like the minds of those 60 monks were freed from the defilements. But the word citta in the suttas, when it's used in reference to an individual, it's a singular, the citta. And so in that case, I take the citta in the sutta system to be, I call it like the core of the person, like that which is the we call it maybe the ongoing mind, well, pretty much what we mean by mind in ordinary discourse. And so the citta is that which can be overcome by defilements, which gets obsessed by obsessions. The citta is that which has to be tamed and mastered. The citta, if it's not controlled, it will lead to suffering. The citta, if it's controlled and tamed, it will lead to happiness. The citta is what is liberated. So in sutta usage, citta is pretty much what we would take to be our own mind, just simply our mind. But then the Abhidhamma is then bringing in, maybe this begins with the Dhammasangani, the first book of the Abhidhamma, this scheme of a sequence of momentary frames of consciousness or of mind. And that becomes the plural cittas, each with its own particular function, its particular role within the sequence of cittas. Does that help to answer that?
That is incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. We'll come to more of the process of cittas maybe this evening. Okay, way in the back. Behind Belinda. Yeah, please stand and then say your name.
Hi, my name is Sophie. And I was trying to understand with the supramundane stages of realization and higher attainment. You were saying that there's the stream entry, once returning, non-returning, and then when we essentially pass to nirvana. How do bodhisattvas end up returning then?
Excuse me?
How do bodhisattvas go about returning, and where in this process do they make that decision?
Okay. What's interesting, in the Abhidhamma system itself, it doesn't deal with the states of consciousness of bodhisattvas. But what I would say is that the bodhisattva is developing wholesome states of consciousness, but based on particular vows and aspirations, but they do not achieve the 4 world-transcending states of consciousness. Because if they attain those 4 world-transcending, or even the first world-transcending state of consciousness, the state of stream entry, then by attaining the state of stream entry, then they become bound for final liberation in a maximum of 7 more lives And in order to follow the bodhisattva practice, they have to continue for thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of more lives developing the paramitas. So within sort of using the Abhidhamma framework, we would say that bodhisattvas would be developing the wholesome sense-sphere consciousness, primarily accompanied by joy and by knowledge. And also they would develop the wholesome fine material sphere of consciousness because they take rebirth in the form realm. I believe they avoid the formless realm because there's no ability to benefit beings in that realm. Yeah, that's my understanding.
Thank you.
And yeah, you have the microphone, okay.
Yes, thank you, Bhante. I'm Doug.
Doug, that's right,
Yes.
yeah.
I have a question about the wholesome cittas, where it mentions that they're either pleasant or neutral feeling.
Yeah.
And my question is, I'm thinking of the Satipatthana Sutta where there's the section on feeling. If I remember this correctly, they sort of divided into worldly feelings and sort of spiritual feelings.
Right,
so under the spiritual feelings, you have pleasant, neutral, and painful. So that would seem, to my mind, to imply that you could have a spiritual or a feeling, or let's say a citta that is painful but is producing progress along the path.
Yeah, that is probably true, but I think what happens, or what causes that painful spiritual feeling to arise is one is aspiring to reach maybe certain stages of progress, and then one is not able to reach them in accordance with one's wish. In fact, this is the way it's explained elsewhere in the suttas, that one is aspiring for some state, higher state of liberation, but one doesn't attain that state. And so one then experiences this pain and displeasure. And so the pain and displeasure there, that mental pain, is because of a kind of aversion towards one's inability to reach the state towards which one aspires. And so we wouldn't say that it's a state of mind that's accompanied by hatred, the way we ordinarily understand it, but there is a degree of aversion there. The aversion is towards one's, say, the unsatisfactory state of one's progress.
Thank you.
Okay, 1 and 2.
Thank you, Bhante. My name is Nat.
Nat?
I'm curious about the super mundane ones. For someone who is a stream enterer, is the idea that for the rest of their life, their consciousness is that of a stream enterer that persists, or is that only when they enter the stream?
Okay, that's very interesting question.
Sort of connected is, I suppose you said,
let's take one question at a time, because often if people ask me 2 questions, then I forget the first one. Okay. The path consciousness of stream entry is just one consciousness, one moment of consciousness that just occurs like that. And when it occurs, then it's followed by a few moments of what's called the fruition consciousness, which we're going to come to. Then the stream enterer will come back to normal consciousness. So they'll have a normal consciousness, just like we go about our ordinary activities, except that now that person has cut off the 3 coarsest fetters, which is the view of a self in regard to the 5 aggregates, doubt about the Buddha and his teaching, and a wrong view of what is called silabbata, rules and observances, or clinging or grasping to rules and observances. So, and then they'll have weakened a number of the other defilements, so those defilements don't arise with the same degree of intensity as in an ordinary person. But their consciousness in their ordinary life is not that of the path of stream entry. They can give rise to states of greed. They can still get angry and sometimes even experience hatred as a stream enterer. They won't adopt any wrong view, so the states of consciousness accompanied by wrong view are gone. The state of consciousness accompanied by doubt is permanently gone. But otherwise, the other wholesome and even unwholesome states of consciousness can arise. Does that get at the question? Okay, and then your second question. Oh, it does, okay. Is that Ming? Okay.
Hi, thank you, Bhante. Actually, my question is about this morning, the topic we're talking about material form. The number 35, I can read. The primary materiality of the 4 kinds of the earth element, water element, fire element, and air element. Their characteristic function and manifestation has been given under the definition of the 4 elements. But as the proximate cause, each has the other 3 as proximate cause. That is really, before I read this, just pass through, not even think about it. But today, I really, really get caught in this paragraph.
Okay.
That kind of sense, like, 4 element can't be existing as separate entity.
They can't be existing as separate entities, yeah.
Is that true? Which means if Earth exists, in there must be water, air, fire.
Right, exactly.
I can understand. For example, if we see the wood, we think about its hard, coarse. We think, okay, this is Earth element in there. But if there are no water, it can't be like shape like this, and it have temperature.
Yeah.
But water is the interesting one. Water, we have a cup of water, then we think, okay, this is water and water only. Usually, I will think that way.
Yeah.
But based on this concept, make me feel like water, if the weight part of the water actually...
The microphone is distorting the sound.
You're
speaking too close into the microphone.
The weight of water probably represents the Earth.
Yeah.
And for example, especially when it's cold, water become ice.
Exactly.
Then it will be, okay. Yeah. This is what I really learned today, and I want to confirm if this understand is correct or not.
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Bendy.
So the four elements are always inseparably bound up with each other.
And then that means they're really at the bottom. I could kind of emptiness makes sense because nothing can really. Stand alone. Before, at least I think, this is Earth, this water, this four element is the separate self, then build on top of it, then derived.
No, they're always inseparably bound together.
It's coexistence. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, maybe we have time for one more question. Oh, yeah, okay.
Hello? Okay. My name is Emilio. Bante. I want to go back to the concept of self.
The concept of
self.
Yeah.
I guess we are studying these aggregates to contemplate their impermanence. Right? That's what you say the first day. Meaning to understand there is not a self. Right? However, I think you mentioned also this morning, sometimes, or people in general say, when he is reborn. Right?
Yeah.
In reality, you said this morning that it's the craving of existence that recreate, for example, an I consciousness in the world.
Yeah.
Right? So I wonder if this term, he is reborn, is actually not appropriate. There is nothing that moves between life. It's more a craving.
Yeah, I think we're going to cover this aspect more in the evening, I hope.
Okay.
Yeah, so I hope that your question will be covered when we come to the discussion in the evening.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a second question. Can
Excuse me?
I have a second question.
Okay, but it has to be a short one because we're coming to...
Yeah, maybe, okay. I tried and you
can
see.
You could ask it.
I can ask it and let me see. The concept of consciousness, right? You started very much related, like I consciousness, is very related to the sense faculty.
Yeah.
And that was clear, very understandable. Then when you move into wholesome and unwholesome consciousness, you drifted away from the sense faculty.
Yeah.
And you may have explained, but I missed that drifting from one very bound to senses to something more.
Okay, actually that's a good point. Okay, these types of consciousness that we've been discussing this afternoon, these are the wholesome, the unwholesome types of consciousness. These are types of mind consciousness. So in the 6 types of consciousness, there's eye, ear, nose, tongue, body. Then the 6th is the mind consciousness. So these are differentiations of mind consciousness. And later we're going to see how the different types of consciousness sort of operate together, function together.
So I consciousness is not really wholesome and unwholesome. It's more the mind consciousness.
The I consciousness, as we'll see, is a resultant, karmic resultant consciousness. So it's neither wholesome nor unwholesome. It's indeterminate or neutral. Okay, we could take now a 5-minute break.